My name is Steve Rosenthal. I am one of the founding partners of RGL Forensics. We are an international firm of forensic accountants and consultants that specialize in the measurement of economic damages and business valuation. If you read any of the insurance periodicals, on almost a daily basis, there is an article about some type of cyber attack. Just last week, Home Depot paid $13 million to settle a consumer lawsuit related to the data breach that happened at Home Depot. This is in addition to the $152 million that Home Depot incurred in cost regarding this cyber breach. On Friday, Business Insurance reported that an unnamed American corporation was a victim of a $100 million cyber attack. How is the insurance industry responding to this problem? But first of all, what is a cyber attack? A cyber attack is an attempt by unauthorized individuals to damage, destroy, or compromise a computer network or system, including the unauthorized theft or usage of stolen data. Who commits these acts? Well, sometimes it honestly is a human error. Sometimes it's a disgruntled employee. In other cases, it's external. Criminals, foreign government, what are called cyber terrorists, or those looking for extortion. The United States is the leading country in cyber crime, followed by Germany, Japan, France, and the United Kingdom. When risk managers were asked what is the biggest risk they fear from a cyber attack, they said loss of reputation, business interruption, and loss of consumer data. So now the insurance industry has developed cyber insurance. The intent is to cover the losses related to damage to or loss of information from an IT system or a network. What's a cyber loss? Well, there's no physical damage in the sense that we are used to under first-party property policies. It's not typically covered under a normal business interruption policy, and it does require the taking out of a cyber risk policies. So what are the cyber risks that businesses confront? From a first-party standpoint, you have the loss or damage to digital assets, data, and software, business interruption losses from network downtime, cyber extortion, where third parties threaten to damage or release data if money is not paid to them, customer notification expenses, where there is a legal or regulatory requirement that demands notification of a security or privacy breach, reputational damage arising from a breach of data that results in a loss of intellectual property or customers, and the theft of money or digital assets through the theft of equipment or data. From a third-party standpoint, you have the security and privacy breaches, the investigation, the defense cost, and civil damages associated with those, like the one that Home Depot just settled last week. There is also multimedia liability to cover the investigation, the defense, and the civil damages arising from defamation, breach of privacy or negligence in publications or in the print media. There's the loss of third-party data, including payment of compensation to customers for denial of access, referred to as DDoS, distributed denial of service, and the failure of the software or the systems. So what are the cyber policies intending to do? They are all different, but typically include a cover for a range of both first-party and third-party liability exposure. You have the damage to the digital data, the business interruption losses from the downtime of the network, which then ensures the loss of income, any increased cost of operations, and the costs being incurred to mitigate the loss. The restoration costs are usually covered. As I said, cyber extortion, reputational damage are covered. The retention of a crisis management and or PR firm is likewise covered. So what's the purpose of business interruption as we know it? In the typical property policy, it's, quote, to put the insured back into the same financial position they would have been in but for the incident, subject to policy wording, end quote. So when you compare a property policy to a cyber policy, what are the similarities and what are some of the differences? In both cases, there needs to be a trigger for the loss to be an insured event. Property damage, quote, is direct physical loss or destruction of or damage to insured property, end quote. Interruption, business interruption, in a cyber policy is defined as the suspension of the service provided by the company's computer system caused solely by a security failure or the inability of the company to access data due to such data being deleted, damaged, corrupted, altered, or lost, but only where such deletion, damage, corruption, alteration, or loss is solely caused by a security failure. Now, in a cyber policy, the period of indemnity usually starts from the end of the waiting period until the interruption is resolved. However, most policies that I've seen have a 120-day maximum period of indemnity. You can, however, in certain circumstances, buy an extended 90-day period from when the resolution of the interruption has occurred. Keep in mind the measurement of a business interruption loss is pretty identical between a property and a cyber policy. Business interruption, as defined in one of the cyber policies, says, business interruption loss incurred by the insured due to a business interruption within the indemnity period as a direct result of the loss or partial inability of the company, computer system first discovered during the period of insurance, which is caused by a business interruption event and which exceeds the waiting period. Most policies that are cyber policies insure the loss of net profit attributed to a loss of revenue arising from the incident, plus continuing expenses, plus any increased costs of working solely incurred as a consequence of the incident to reduce either A, the length of the period of interruption and or minimize the loss of profits. Some of the issues and considerations that have become prevalent in cyber business interruptions are that it follows a cyber crime, which is very similar, but not exactly like a first-party property loss where there is physical damage to an asset. Cyber policy business interruption wording appears to try to achieve the same result, but because this is relatively new, not all of the wordings are similar, and I think the hope is that the markets will align themselves, as they have done in the property world, to have consistency. The interruption period is mostly defined as a date when an attack or damage occurred until when the service is restored, that is, the damage is repaired, similar to U.S. property wording. Some policies, as I said, do have the option to buy an extended indemnity period, but it's often limited in the additional time you can buy the policy for. Big issues in cyber is when did the attack occurred? When is the waiting period over? Is the loss ongoing? Or is it ended? Which is not only a very easy point to find, but all losses that flow from a cyber loss are not necessarily covered. Direct linkage of lost revenue should be tied to the event and to the specific attack. In projecting revenue under a cyber loss, it's very similar to a property policy. You need to establish a benchmark in order to project the revenue. One of the big differences is that some policies on cyber have clauses that specifically apply to any credit of sales that are conducted elsewhere or by other means. Looking at expenses, the saved expenses are basically the same, but they don't write a cyber policy that's gross earnings less saved expenses. The only ones that I have seen are net profit plus continuing expenses. Another issue in a cyber policy is causation. You need to know when assessing ongoing losses after the service is resumed, will the insurers seek to distinguish between the interruption of service and the loss of trust by customers in terms of a covered event? The policy triggers: is it hardware damage? Is it software damage? Is it malicious content? Was there user data or databases compromised? Is any or all of those issues damage? Must it be to the insured's own computer, or can it be to the supplier's computer? And then again, who caused the damage? Rogue employee, a cyber crook, errors by staff, everybody makes them, independent contractors or outsourcers. Does the incident constitute direct damage? To answer that question, in most cases, the insurance company will hire forensic computer experts. But what are the differences? Similar to traditional business interruption losses, the insured is going to incur reasonable and necessary expenses during the period of restoration to minimize or avoid a partial or total interruption of its service as a result of a covered event, including renting or leasing external equipment, additional staff, or outside labor. But other portions of a cyber policy, dissimilar to property policies, are they will cover the investigation cost, the restoration cost, any short-term workarounds, the remediation and prevention costs, as we said, cyber extortion, reputational damage, consumer and regulatory notification, and any fines or penalties. Most cyber policies refer to additional expenses that the cost must be economic. Quote, spend $1 to save $1. Extra expenses that the insured incurs need to be segregated, and it may not be as straightforward as one thinks when you're trying to determine what costs are over and above normal. Most insureds will use internal resources in an effort to resume their business as promptly as possible. Speed is of the essence, and the insured is most likely to employ substantial internal manpower to rectify the damage, protect its reputation. Those are not necessarily increased costs to the business, but in reality are a burden to the business operation. Database restoration or replacement sometimes falls under separate coverage under a cyber policy. Some insurers need to reconstitute the database, install and reload its service, relocate operations, or redirect DNS, and is basically the phone book of the internet. To make sales, the insured might purchase services from competitors. Websites and domains may be purchased and developed, or redirect the DNS. So there are similarities between a first-party property business interruption loss and what is contemplated to be a business interruption loss in a cyber policy. But there are big, big differences. Almost all the cyber policies I've seen have a specified waiting period, have a defined time for the period of interruption, and they allow significantly other expenses to be covered, like ransom and extortion. Thank you.